The restaurant was filled with soft golden light that reflected off the polished floors and shiny silverware. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting small rainbows across the walls. Every table was set perfectly, with white linen and neatly folded napkins. The air smelled faintly of baked bread, roasted meat, and delicate desserts. It was the kind of place where people came to enjoy more than food. They came to see and be seen. She moved through the tables, carrying trays carefully, her uniform pressed and neat. She had worked there for a long time, and she knew the routines and the guests. Some smiled politely as she passed, some ignored her, but she didn't mind. She had learned long ago not to let small gestures affect her mood. She focused on her work and her own quiet dreams. In the corner of the restaurant was a grand piano. Its polished black surface reflected the lights, and it seemed to wait silently, as if it knew a story was about to unfold. She often glanced at it as she moved about her duties. Playing the piano had been a secret part of her life since she was a child. She had taken lessons quietly, never performing in front of strangers, but the music had always been her escape. When she touched the keys at home, the world outside disappeared, leaving only the sound and the feeling of her own hands moving freely. That evening, the restaurant was busier than usual. A group of wealthy guests had arrived, and their laughter and chatter filled the room. One of them, a man in a perfectly tailored suit with a confident, almost arrogant presence, seemed to enjoy the attention he received. He had a commanding voice and a way of looking at people that made them feel small. He noticed her as she carried drinks and silver trays from table to table. A mischievous idea crossed his mind. He leaned back in his chair, smiling at his companions, and whispered something that made them chuckle. She didn't notice him at first, focused on keeping the plates balanced and the drinks from spilling. But soon his gaze followed her. He gestured for her to come closer, and she walked over cautiously, setting a tray down at a nearby table. "Can you play that piano over there?" he asked loudly, his voice cutting through the chatter. There was a slight edge to his words, almost as if he expected her to refuse. She hesitated, glancing at the piano. Her heart skipped a beat. She had never played in front of strangers in a place like this. The thought of being laughed at or embarrassed made her stomach twist. She opened her mouth to say something, but the guests around them were already watching, curious about what was happening. "Go on," he said, a smirk on his face. "Show us what you've got." He leaned back in his chair, clearly expecting her to fail. She felt a rush of nerves but also something else, a quiet determination she had kept hidden for years. She had worked hard to learn, and though she had never performed publicly, she knew she could play. She walked toward the piano slowly, feeling every eye on her. The guests were whispering now, some laughing quietly, some just staring in anticipation. She took a deep breath and reached out to touch the keys. The cold black and white keys felt familiar under her fingers, and a wave of calm washed over her. For a moment, the nervousness faded, replaced by a quiet confidence. This was her moment, though she didn't know yet how it would unfold. The man in the suit watched with a smile that was meant to be smug, his friends chuckling at what they thought would be her humiliation. She sat down on the piano bench, adjusted the height slightly, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. She could hear the soft hum of conversation around her, the clinking of glasses, but in her mind, it was quiet. All that existed was her and the piano. She remembered the hours she had spent practicing at home, the silent evenings when no one was watching, the feeling of the music flowing through her. It had always been a private joy, a secret she held close. But now it was no longer just hers. The room was full of people, some mocking, some curious, and she felt the weight of their attention pressing down on her. She pressed the first key, then another slowly at first. The sound was soft but steady, like a gentle breeze. The man's smile faltered slightly as he realized that the music was not awkward or wrong. It had a strange beauty that drew the attention of the room. Guests leaned in, their chatter quieting as they listened. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the music guide her fingers. Each note flowed naturally, each chord blending into the next. She was no longer thinking about the audience or the man who had tried to embarrass her. She was playing for herself, and for the first time in a long time she felt completely free. The man in the suit shifted in his chair, his smugness giving way to surprise. He had expected laughter, not music that filled the room with beauty. His friends looked at him, puzzled, as they realized she was more talented than anyone had imagined. The waitress continued, her music growing stronger and more confident with each passing moment. She didn't rush. She let each note speak for itself, letting the melody tell a story that words could not capture. By the time she finished the first piece, the room was silent for a heartbeat, as if everyone had been holding their breath. Then one guest began to clap softly, and soon the applause grew louder, echoing off the walls. She opened her eyes, looking at the people around her, and saw genuine admiration in their faces. The man who had tried to humiliate her sat frozen, his plan completely overturned by her talent. She smiled quietly, feeling a mix of pride and relief. This was not just a performance. It was a turning point. The piano had always been her secret, but now it was her voice, speaking louder than any words could. She had faced her fear, and in doing so, had captured the hearts of everyone in the room. As she rose from the bench, the applause continued, and she returned to her duties, but something had changed. The confidence she felt lingered, and she knew that her life would never be quite the same. The man in the suit looked at her differently now, and she carried herself with a quiet dignity that no one could take away. The restaurant had witnessed more than a performance that night. It had witnessed a hidden talent finally finding its moment in the world. After the applause had faded, she returned to her usual tasks, carrying trays with drinks and plates with delicate desserts. But her mind was still on the piano. The music she had played lingered in the room, and she could feel the energy it had left behind. Guests glanced at her now with a newfound respect, some offering polite nods, others whispering among themselves. She tried to stay calm and professional, though her heart still raced from the performance. The man in the suit, who had initially tried to embarrass her, watched from his table with a mixture of confusion and frustration. His plan had completely backfired. He had wanted to see her fail, to laugh at her hesitation, but instead, she had stunned everyone. He shifted in his chair, clearly unsure how to respond, while his companions exchanged glances and murmurs. She carried on with her work, keeping her head low, but there was a quiet satisfaction in her steps. She knew what she had done, and it felt like a small victory. The other staff members, who had seen her practice quietly in the past, watched from a distance with admiration, amazed that her hidden talent had finally been revealed in such a dramatic way. Some smiled knowingly, recognizing the skill that had always been there. The guests, still talking quietly, began to reflect on the moment. The initial judgment and laughter had been replaced by genuine surprise and appreciation. Many of them had never expected such talent from someone they saw only as a waitress. They whispered to each other about how wrong they had been to underestimate her. The room that had moments ago been filled with casual chatter and occasional laughter was now buzzing with a different kind of energy. Curiosity, amazement, and admiration. She paused at a table, taking orders from a group of guests who were clearly trying to make conversation with her, now curious about the person they had just witnessed at the piano. She answered politely, maintaining her professional demeanor, but internally, she felt a quiet pride. She had faced the challenge, stayed composed, and let her abilities speak for themselves. The realization that she had turned a potentially humiliating situation into a moment of triumph filled her with confidence. The piano in the corner seemed to call to her again. She glanced at it occasionally as she moved through the restaurant. Though she had returned to her duties, the memory of the music she had created was fresh in her mind. It was not just notes on the keys. It was a statement, a message that talent and hard work could shine even when unexpected or overlooked. The man in the suit, realizing he had been wrong, leaned back in his chair. He tried to compose himself, attempting a casual smile, but it did not mask the surprise and discomfort he felt. He had underestimated her, and now he could not ignore the admiration she had earned. Other guests were now looking at him, sensing his discomfort, and some even whispered among themselves, commenting on the unexpected turn of events. She moved on to the next table, balancing a tray with drinks. The guests she approached were polite, some trying to engage her in conversation, perhaps curious about how she had learned to play the piano so beautifully. She responded with her usual quiet kindness, keeping the conversation brief but friendly. Inside, she felt a quiet joy, knowing that she had shared a piece of herself, even if it was only through her music. The restaurant continued to hum with activity, but there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. People spoke more softly, listening more carefully, and glancing occasionally at the piano, wondering if she might play again. The energy in the room had changed. It was no longer just about status, wealth, or appearances. For a moment, everyone was united by the beauty of music and the surprise of discovering talent where they least expected it. She finished taking orders and walked back toward the kitchen. The staff looked at her with quiet admiration, some whispering about how they had always known she was talented. Even those who had not seen her play before now realized that there was something special about her. It was not just skill. It was the way she connected with the music, the emotion she brought to each note, and the confidence that had shone through in a moment when many thought she would falter. The man in the suit had finally spoken to one of his friends, saying something under his breath, a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. He could not dismiss what he had seen. His attempt to embarrass her had completely backfired, and he had no choice but to acknowledge her talent, even if silently. The dynamic in the restaurant had shifted, and he was no longer the center of attention. She was. As the evening progressed, the restaurant began to quiet down. The rush of guests lessened, and the staff began to clean and prepare for the next day. She moved through the room with calm efficiency, but her mind kept returning to the piano. She wondered if she might play again, not because anyone demanded it, but because it felt like a part of her story, a part of her identity that could no longer be hidden. A few guests approached her directly, asking if she would play once more, eager to hear the music that had so unexpectedly captured their attention. She hesitated briefly, thinking about the nervousness she had felt earlier, but then she smiled quietly. This time, she would play not out of fear or obligation, but for the joy of sharing her talent. The idea filled her with anticipation and excitement. She walked back to the piano, this time with a sense of purpose and calm. She adjusted the bench and let her fingers hover over the keys, feeling the cool smoothness beneath them. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath as she began again, slowly at first, letting each note flow naturally. This was no longer a challenge imposed by someone else. This was her own expression, her music filling the space and touching the hearts of those who listened. The sound was soft and beautiful yet confident. Guests listened quietly, some closing their eyes, letting the music wash over them. The man in the suit watched, unable to hide his fascination and surprise. He had tried to humiliate her, but instead, he was witnessing something extraordinary. She was no longer just a waitress. She had become the centerpiece of the evening, admired and celebrated for her talent. As she continued to play, the room seemed to transform. The golden light of the chandeliers reflected off the polished surfaces, mingling with the gentle tones of the piano. The atmosphere was filled with a sense of wonder and appreciation, a quiet acknowledgement that talent can shine in the most unexpected places. When she finally finished, the applause was louder this time, more heartfelt. Guests clapped and cheered, some standing in admiration. The man in the suit could only nod, recognizing the moment had completely changed. He had tried to assert his power, but she had turned it around with grace, skill, and heart. She smiled quietly, acknowledging the applause with a modest bow, then returned to her duties. Though she continued to serve the guests with professionalism, something had shifted within her. She had faced a challenge, revealed her hidden talent, and earned respect and admiration. The experience had strengthened her confidence, showing her that she could shine even in moments designed to intimidate or belittle her. As the night came to an end, the restaurant emptied, and the staff began cleaning and closing for the evening. She lingered for a moment, looking at the piano in the corner, feeling a sense of connection and pride. It had been a night of surprise, courage, and revelation, and she knew that this moment, this performance, would stay with her forever. The music had not only touched the guests but had changed her own perspective, reminding her of the power of talent, perseverance, and self-belief. The following day, the restaurant was quieter in the early hours, the sun shining softly through the tall windows. She arrived before her shift, carrying her bag and taking a moment to look around. The memory of last night's performance lingered in her mind, like a song that refuses to fade. It had changed everything, even if subtly. Staff who had been distant now greeted her with warm smiles, and some of the guests from the previous evening were already asking if she would be there to play again. As she prepared for her shift, she felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She knew that people were talking about her now, and though it was flattering, it also brought pressure. She wanted to live up to the expectations without feeling overwhelmed. Her hands, usually steady as she carried trays and poured drinks, twitched slightly with anticipation at the thought of touching the piano keys once more. Music had always been a part of her, but now it was part of her story in a public way, and she wasn't sure how to feel about that. The man in the suit arrived again that evening, entering the restaurant with the same confident stride. His friends followed him, whispering and laughing as they settled into their chairs. But this time, he looked slightly uneasy, glancing toward the piano and then at her. Something about the way she had handled herself yesterday had clearly unsettled him. He had expected to see a shy, nervous waitress who would fumble, but instead, she had displayed talent, grace, and confidence. He had underestimated her completely. As she moved between the tables, serving drinks and taking orders, she noticed his gaze following her. There was no sneer this time, only a flicker of uncertainty. She maintained her professional demeanor, moving gracefully and quietly, her mind focused on the tasks at hand. But beneath her calm exterior, her thoughts kept returning to the piano. She could feel the tension in the air, the curiosity and expectation from the guests, and it made her pulse quicken. He leaned back in his chair, speaking to his companions, his tone quieter than before, as if he was trying to measure how she might respond tonight. She wasn't sure what he expected, and she didn't care. Last night had shown her that she could face challenges without fear, that her talent could shine even when others tried to undermine her. That knowledge gave her strength and a sense of calm as she approached the piano once more. A few guests had gathered near the corner, some whispering excitedly about what they might hear tonight. She took a deep breath and sat down on the bench, adjusting her posture and letting her fingers hover over the keys. The room seemed to hold its breath, sensing the quiet anticipation. This time, she would not be guided by nervousness or the desire to prove herself. She would play for the love of music, letting the notes tell their story. Her first touch on the keys brought a soft, melodic sound that echoed gently through the room. The man in the suit raised his eyebrows slightly, as if realizing again that her ability was genuine. Guests who had come to watch curiously now leaned in, drawn by the beauty and confidence in her playing. The music filled the room, creating a calm, almost magical atmosphere that made even the busiest moments seem slower and more meaningful. As she played, she allowed her emotions to flow into the music. Every note was deliberate, every chord a reflection of her feelings and her journey. She thought about the long hours she had practiced in silence, the patience and dedication she had poured into her craft. All of that effort was now visible not in words but in sound. She could feel the guests responding to it, their attention shifting from casual observation to genuine appreciation. The man in the suit looked around, noticing how people were reacting. His companions were clearly impressed, some whispering excitedly about the performance, while others watched in silent admiration. He had tried to control the situation to make her feel small, but the outcome was completely different from what he had anticipated. She was no longer just a waitress. She was the center of attention, the one who held the room with her talent. Time seemed to stretch as she continued to play, the music flowing naturally from her hands. The melody carried emotions that words could not express. Hope, pride, joy, and a hint of defiance. Guests closed their eyes, letting the notes fill the space and touch them in unexpected ways. The man in the suit leaned forward slightly, as if trying to understand what made her playing so captivating. It was not just technical skill. It was the feeling, the heart she poured into every key. Some guests began to clap softly, almost instinctively, moved by the beauty of the music. She did not let it distract her, keeping her focus on the piano and the story she was telling through sound. The room was transformed, no longer just a place of dining and conversation, but a space where music connected everyone present. Even the staff paused to listen, appreciating the depth and emotion in her performance. When she finally finished, the applause was immediate and overwhelming. Guests rose to their feet, clapping and cheering in a way that made her heart swell. She smiled quietly, acknowledging their admiration with a graceful nod. The man in the suit sat frozen, his earlier confidence replaced by astonishment and a sense of defeat. He had underestimated her, and she had proven herself without arrogance or boastfulness. As she returned to her duties, she noticed the change in how people treated her. Guests spoke to her with respect, asking questions about her music and expressing genuine curiosity. Even strangers who had just come in for dinner paused to compliment her, some asking if she would play again in the future. She felt a sense of pride and belonging that went beyond the applause. It was the knowledge that her talent had touched people, had made a difference in the room, if only for a few moments. The man in the suit eventually stood to leave, his friends following quietly. He cast one last glance at her, a mix of respect and lingering frustration. She did not react. She simply continued her work, focused and composed. She had faced him and the expectations he tried to impose, and she had emerged stronger, more confident, and fully aware of her own abilities. After the restaurant emptied and the night came to a close, she lingered near the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft echoes of earlier applause. She felt a sense of completion, a connection with the music that went beyond performance. It was a reminder of why she had devoted herself to learning, practicing, and mastering her craft in the first place. That night, as she left the restaurant and walked through the quiet streets, she reflected on the events of the past 2 days. She had faced a challenge that could have been humiliating, yet she had turned it into an opportunity to shine. She had discovered not only that her talent was real, but that it had the power to touch others, to inspire admiration, and to change perceptions. For the first time, she truly believed in herself, in the beauty and strength of her own abilities, and in the idea that courage combined with skill can create moments that are unforgettable. The evening settled into a gentle rhythm, with soft chatter and the clinking of silverware filling the restaurant. She moved between the tables with practiced grace, carrying drinks and refilling glasses, all the while feeling the quiet pull of the piano in the corner. It had become more than an instrument. It was a connection to her confidence, a reminder of her own abilities, and the way she had surprised everyone in the room. She noticed the group of wealthy guests from earlier, including the man in the suit, seated at a corner table. He was watching her carefully, but this time, his expression was less smug and more uncertain. There was no sneer, only a flicker of curiosity mixed with something like admiration. His friends whispered among themselves, glancing at the piano and then at her, as if unsure what to expect next. The energy in the room had shifted subtly. People were no longer simply watching, they were waiting, anticipating something extraordinary. She took a deep breath and approached the piano once more. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment, remembering the music she had played before. She allowed her memories of practice and quiet moments at home to guide her, letting the familiarity of the piano calm her nerves. The room seemed to pause as she sat down on the bench, her posture relaxed yet confident. Guests leaned in slightly, sensing that this performance would be different from the last. She pressed the first key, a soft note that seemed to hang in the air. Then another, and another, slowly building into a gentle melody. The music was delicate at first, almost tentative, but each note grew in confidence, filling the space with a beauty that could not be ignored. The guests who had come expecting entertainment or amusement now listened with rapt attention, drawn in by the elegance and emotion in her playing. The man in the suit shifted slightly in his chair, clearly unsettled. He had thought he would see her falter, yet here she was, commanding attention without arrogance. Her fingers moved with precision and grace, each chord a statement of skill and poise. It was not only technical mastery that captivated the audience. It was the way she seemed to infuse the music with feeling, telling a story that transcended words. Guests began to murmur quietly among themselves, astonished at the depth of her talent. Some exchanged glances, whispering compliments, while others simply listened in silence, allowing the melody to wash over them. The atmosphere of the room had transformed completely. It was no longer about wealth, status, or appearances. For a few moments, everyone was united by the music and the surprise of discovering a hidden talent in the most unexpected place. As she continued, the music grew more complex, flowing naturally from her hands. She allowed herself to become fully immersed in the sound, closing her eyes briefly to feel the notes more deeply. The room seemed to disappear around her, leaving only the piano, the music, and the subtle reactions of the guests. She could sense their admiration and awe, their surprise at seeing someone they had underestimated reveal such skill. The man in the suit watched, shifting uncomfortably. He had tried to assert control and humiliate her, yet she had turned the situation completely around. He had not expected to see a performance that was not only technically proficient but also emotionally moving. Each note she played seemed to undo his assumptions, drawing attention to her strengths rather than her supposed vulnerabilities. Some guests began to clap softly, almost involuntarily, their appreciation growing as they listened. She did not let it distract her, continuing to play with focus and passion. Each chord and phrase was deliberate, a reflection of her dedication, practice, and the years she had spent perfecting her craft in private. The music was a window into her heart, revealing her confidence, her perseverance, and the quiet strength that had always been a part of her. The room had become a shared experience. Guests who had been strangers moments before were now connected through the music, moved by the unexpected display of talent. Even the staff paused in their work, listening and smiling quietly, proud to witness her skill and the way she commanded the room without needing validation or applause. The man in the suit finally spoke to one of his companions, his voice subdued. He seemed to acknowledge, if reluctantly, that she had surpassed expectations and that his attempt to embarrass her had utterly failed. He watched as she continued, realizing that her confidence was not dependent on his opinion or approval. The dynamic had shifted completely. She was no longer the one under scrutiny, but the one in control of the moment. As the music built to a gentle crescendo, she allowed herself a small smile. She was no longer nervous or intimidated. The piano had become a tool through which she could express herself fully, and she embraced the freedom it offered. Guests sat in awe, some with tears in their eyes, others simply lost in the beauty of the sound. The restaurant had become a sanctuary of music and emotion, and she was at the center of it. When the final notes faded, the room erupted in applause. Guests stood to cheer, some clapping enthusiastically, others offering standing ovations. She bowed slightly, her smile humble yet confident, acknowledging the appreciation without arrogance. The man in the suit sat quietly, his expression unreadable but clearly impressed. He had been wrong to try to embarrass her, and there was no denying the impact she had made. Returning to her duties, she felt a sense of quiet triumph. The music had allowed her to show her talent in a way that words could not, and she had done so with grace and composure. Guests continued to speak to her with admiration, some asking about her musical background, others simply expressing their surprise and delight. Even strangers who had entered the restaurant that evening were touched by the performance, recognizing the skill and heart she had poured into it. As the night wound down and the last guests left, she lingered near the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys. The room was silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint echo of earlier applause. She reflected on the events of the evening, The way she had transformed a potential moment of humiliation into a display of talent and confidence. It was a reminder that skill, dedication, and self-belief could overcome even the most challenging situations. Walking home that night, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The piano had become more than an instrument. It was a symbol of her resilience and her ability to rise above expectations. She had shown not only her skill but also the strength of character that came with perseverance and self-confidence. The experience had left a lasting impression on the guests, the staff, and herself, reinforcing the idea that true talent can shine, even when hidden in unexpected places. As she closed the door behind her, she smiled softly, knowing that this was only the beginning. The piano would always be there, waiting for her, ready to let her voice and her talent shine in the world. She had faced doubt and uncertainty, and she had triumphed, not through confrontation, but through the quiet power of her music and the confidence she had nurtured over the years. The next day, the restaurant felt different from the usual morning rush. The events of the previous nights had spread quietly among the regulars and the staff, and there was a subtle buzz in the air. Guests who had heard about the piano performance were curious, hoping to witness the talent they had heard so much about. Even some who had doubted her abilities before were now looking forward to seeing the quiet waitress who had stunned everyone. She arrived early, carrying her bag and taking a moment to breathe before stepping into the restaurant. She ran her fingers over the piano keys, feeling the smooth surface beneath her touch. It was comforting, familiar, and exciting all at once. She had grown more confident with each performance, and the anticipation of playing again brought a small smile to her face. Today felt different. Today, it was no longer about proving herself to anyone, but about sharing something meaningful and beautiful. As she prepared for her shift, the staff greeted her with warm smiles. They had witnessed her transformation, the way she had captivated guests and turned a potentially embarrassing moment into something remarkable. Some of them had watched quietly from a distance, secretly proud and inspired. She felt a quiet satisfaction in knowing that her efforts and talent were finally recognized, even by those who had always seen her as just another waitress. The evening began with the usual hum of activity. Guests chatted, orders were taken, and the restaurant filled with the comforting sounds of clinking silverware and low conversation. Yet, there was an undercurrent of curiosity, a sense that something special might happen again. People were glancing toward the piano, anticipating her performance, and she could feel their expectations pressing lightly against her shoulders. She welcomed it. She had learned to channel nerves into focus, to let music guide her rather than fear. The man in the suit arrived once again, this time more subdued, almost hesitant. He seemed aware that his previous attempts to control or belittle her had failed spectacularly. His companions whispered among themselves, curious to see what she would do this time. The power dynamic in the room had shifted. She was no longer the one who might falter, but the one who held the attention and respect of the room. When the time came for her to play, she moved to the piano with calm determination. Her fingers hovered above the keys, and she let the familiar feel of the instrument steady her. The first notes were soft, deliberate, and immediately captured the room's attention. Guests who had come to watch her hesitantly now leaned forward, listening intently, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. The music began gently, each note flowing smoothly into the next. She allowed herself to feel the emotion behind the melody, to let her heart guide her fingers. Each chord was deliberate, yet full of expression, and it carried a story that words could never convey. The man in the suit shifted in his chair, clearly affected, though he tried to hide it. He had wanted to control the moment, to humiliate her, but the music had turned the tables, leaving him in awe. As she continued, the complexity of the music grew, weaving delicate patterns that mesmerized the listeners. Guests closed their eyes, allowing themselves to be carried by the notes, lost in the sound that filled the room. Even the staff paused, standing quietly, enchanted by the performance. It was no longer a simple demonstration of skill. It was a shared experience that brought emotion, surprise, and admiration into every corner of the restaurant. She felt the energy of the audience not as pressure, but as support. The music seemed to resonate with everyone present, each note connecting her to the guests in an unspoken way. She smiled softly, realizing that she had moved beyond proving herself. She was creating a moment that would linger in people's memories long after they left the room. The man in the suit glanced around, noticing the expressions of wonder on the faces of those he had come with. Some whispered quietly, commenting on the beauty and depth of the performance. He had underestimated her, assuming she would be nervous or clumsy. Yet she had not only survived the challenge but had elevated it into something unforgettable. The realization was clear. She was no longer defined by anyone's expectations except her own. The music flowed effortlessly from her hands, carrying emotion and story. Each chord built upon the last, creating a tapestry of sound that seemed to transcend the confines of the restaurant. Guests listened with rapt attention, caught in the spell of the performance. Even those who had initially been dismissive found themselves drawn in, experiencing awe and admiration that they could not hide. Applause began to ripple through the room at the conclusion of each piece, growing louder with each note that faded into silence. She acknowledged it with a modest nod, her smile quiet but full of pride. The man in the suit remained seated, a mixture of astonishment and reluctant respect in his eyes. He had been wrong completely, and there was no denying the impact she had made. She had transformed a potential moment of embarrassment into a display of talent, courage, and elegance. As she returned to her duties, guests approached her with words of admiration and curiosity. Some asked how she had learned to play so beautifully. Others expressed surprise at the depth and emotion in her performance. Even strangers who had come for dinner found themselves compelled to acknowledge her skill, speaking in hushed tones to one another. She responded with quiet grace, answering politely but letting the music speak for her more than words ever could. The restaurant, once a place of casual conversation and routine, had become a stage where talent and courage shone brightly. Her performance had changed the atmosphere entirely, creating a sense of unity and appreciation among those present. It was no longer about status, wealth, or appearance. It was about the human connection fostered through music and the shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary. When the last guests left and the restaurant began to close, she lingered near the piano, her hands brushing lightly over the keys. The echoes of applause and admiration still filled her mind, reminding her of the strength she had discovered within herself. She had faced doubt, challenge, and expectation, and she had triumphed, not through confrontation but through the quiet power of her talent. Walking home that night, she reflected on the events that had unfolded. She felt proud, not only of her ability to play the piano but of the way she had handled herself, maintaining composure and confidence under scrutiny. The experience had reinforced her belief in herself, in her talent, and in the quiet strength that comes from dedication, practice, and self-belief. She knew that this was not the end, but rather the beginning of a new chapter in her life, where her music could continue to touch others and reveal the depth of her own spirit. The restaurant was quieter that evening, with only a few tables occupied and the soft glow of chandeliers reflecting off the polished floors. She moved calmly between the tables, carrying plates and drinks, but her mind kept returning to the piano in the corner. It had become more than an instrument. It was a symbol of her confidence, her talent, and the way she had turned a moment of humiliation into a triumph that no one could forget. Guests who had come that evening seemed to carry with them an air of anticipation, curious to see if she would play again. Some had heard stories from friends about her talent, while others had witnessed her performances in the previous days. The energy in the room was subtle but noticeable, a quiet expectation that something special might happen. She felt a mixture of excitement and calm, knowing that whatever unfolded, she had already proven herself in ways that mattered more than anyone's opinion. The man in the suit arrived once more, entering with the same confident stride, but there was a difference this time. His posture was less assertive, and there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes as he glanced at the piano. He had tried before to embarrass her, only to be astonished by her skill, and now he seemed almost hesitant, unsure of what to expect. His companions whispered quietly, curious and somewhat anxious, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary again. She moved toward the piano, her steps measured and calm. She took a moment to adjust the bench, placing her hands lightly over the keys. The familiar feel of the piano beneath her fingers brought a sense of comfort, a reminder that she was in control of this moment. Guests turned their attention toward her, leaning in slightly, anticipating the music that was about to fill the room. The first note sounded soft and deliberate. It echoed through the room, catching the attention of everyone present. She allowed the melody to build naturally, each note flowing into the next with a gentle confidence. The man in the suit leaned forward slightly, his expression revealing a mixture of surprise and admiration. He had expected hesitation or awkwardness, but instead, she commanded the room with her music, captivating everyone without a word. As she played, she allowed her emotions to guide her fingers, letting each chord tell a story. The melody was expressive and moving, reflecting her journey, her dedication, and the quiet strength she had cultivated over the years. Guests listened intently, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the sound, while others watched in awe, realizing that they were witnessing a rare and genuine talent. The room seemed to transform around her. The soft hum of conversation faded, replaced by the music that connected everyone present. The energy shifted from casual curiosity to admiration and wonder. Even the staff, who had watched quietly from a distance, paused in their work, captivated by the depth and beauty of her performance. It was a shared moment, a reminder that talent, dedication, and passion could create experiences that touched hearts and left lasting impressions. The man in the suit shifted uncomfortably in his chair, clearly affected by the performance. His initial intention to assert dominance and embarrass her had been completely reversed. He watched as guests reacted with genuine admiration, clapping softly and whispering their astonishment. He had underestimated her, and the realization brought a quiet, unspoken respect. She had turned his plan on its head, demonstrating not only her skill but also her poise and confidence. She continued playing, allowing the music to flow naturally. Each note was deliberate, yet infused with emotion, carrying a story that resonated with the audience. The melody built slowly, growing in complexity and richness, and the room was completely absorbed. Guests were drawn in, feeling the beauty of the music, experiencing emotions that words could not express. It was more than a performance. It was a moment that united everyone through the shared power of music. Soft applause began as she reached the conclusion of the piece, growing louder as the final notes lingered in the air. Guests rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically, some even offering standing ovations. She acknowledged the appreciation with a quiet smile and a humble nod, her confidence evident without arrogance. The man in the suit remained seated, a mixture of astonishment and reluctant respect in his eyes. He could not deny the impact she had made, nor the way she had captivated everyone present. Returning to her duties, she felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond the applause. The experience was a reminder that talent and perseverance could overcome doubt and expectation. Guests continued to compliment her, asking about her background and expressing their admiration. Even strangers who had arrived unaware of her performances were touched by her music, recognizing the dedication and heart she had poured into every note. The restaurant had transformed from a place of casual dining into a space of connection, emotion, and shared experience. Her music had shifted the atmosphere, creating a sense of unity and appreciation among the guests. It was no longer about status or appearances. It was about witnessing something extraordinary and recognizing the power of talent and courage. As the night drew to a close, she lingered near the piano, gently pressing the keys and feeling the resonance of the instrument beneath her fingers. The echoes of applause and admiration still filled her mind, a reminder of the confidence she had gained and the impact she had made. She reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from quiet practice at home to performing for strangers and inspiring admiration. Walking home through the quiet streets, she felt a deep sense of accomplishment and peace. The piano had become more than a tool for music. It was a symbol of her journey, her dedication, and her ability to face challenges with grace. She had turned moments of potential embarrassment into opportunities for expression and connection, proving to herself and others that talent and courage could shine brightly even in unexpected circumstances. She knew that her life had changed in small but meaningful ways. The recognition and respect she had earned were not the ultimate goal. The true reward was the understanding of her own abilities and the confidence to embrace them fully. She had shown that dedication, practice, and self-belief could transform a challenging situation into a moment of beauty and inspiration. As she reached her door and stepped inside, she looked back at the quiet streets and smiled softly. The piano awaited her, a constant reminder of her talent and the journey she had undertaken. She had faced doubt, challenge, and expectation, and had emerged not only victorious but empowered. The experience had shown her the strength within, the joy of sharing her gift, and the lasting impact that one person's talent could have on those around them. She knew that this was just the beginning, and that her music would continue to inspire, connect, and bring joy, proving that true talent can shine in even the most unexpected places.